everyone. This is Micah with Service Reef, and we are so excited today to be with Pang Thao, who is the operations specialist with Envision, a nonprofit that works around the world. And Pang, I'm so excited to have this conversation with you today. And so just thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Micah.
Absolutely. Well, okay, before we get into this a little bit, just give me a quick bio of you. Like what's, 30 seconds at a high level, Pang. Who are you? What do you do? How do you enjoy your time?
Okay, my name is Pang Thao. I come from a family of 12. I'm the third in line, the oldest daughter. I like to hang out with friends. I love food, so I'm always trying to look for new restaurants. I guess my favorite cuisine might be sushi. It's always my default when I can't figure out what I want to eat. And I have an adorable 10-year-old golden doodle that I absolutely love.
That is awesome. That is awesome. Well, okay. So tell me about your first like missions or global adventure. Like, what was it? How did it go? What kind of drew you to kind of a global perspective?
Okay, so that's funny because growing up in a Christian family and growing in my faith, I used to pray to God and ask Him never to call me into missions. So in my mid 20s, I believe, I felt this hunger to experience God in a different way. And He started pressing me towards short-term mission. And so I thought, okay, well, you know what? I want to experience Him in a new way. And if this is what He's laid on my heart, I want to explore what this looked like. And so I was working with a single adult group that was planning to go on a short-term missions trip. And so I signed on to join the trip. Well, then one by one, the leaders were dropping off. And then I got pushed to be the new leader of leading this team. And I thought, I've never done a missions trip before. I wanted to go under someone who's leading us. And now that's not the case. And now I got to figure this thing out because now I'm leading a group of single adults. And so we went to Peru, which was part of this nonprofit that just started called Inca Link. And they're also part of the Christian Missionary Alliance family. And so we went there and it was the best experience I've ever had. It was one of the most transformational experience I have also had. I mean, you're pretty much experiencing a country that you're not used to, right? Here in the States, there's so many privileges and you have so many options and freedom to make those choices. And over there in Peru, you saw the poverty that they experience day in and day out and the simplicity of life there. So the week that we were there, I was experiencing a lot of things that I was not comfortable with. And so what do you do when you experience things that you're not comfortable in doing, but you want to experience what God wants to do? You have to submit to what He wants you to do. And so almost every day, I would spend time with the Lord. And when I encounter something that I wasn't comfortable doing, I have to ask, what is it that you want me to do? And then you just have to submit and you just have to do. And it's in those moments where I experience greater joy in Christ and interacting and engaging with the locals there. Language was a barrier, walking away from that. I felt like if I knew Spanish, I think I would have a better experience connecting with the locals there. But overall, I think it was still a great experience. And so I always encourage people to do a short-term mission trip if they want to know what God is doing around the world, because we have such a big God. And if they want to experience God, they need to do a missions trip.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, you find yourself now in a role in which you're like running a lot of these types of trips
Mhm.
as well as coordinating globally. Tell me just a little bit about your role. What's your day to day look like? And then I have another question for you about your role once you get
Okay.
through that.
My day to day. Okay, so essentially my role is to help the rest of my team run our programs well and efficiently, and then working with other areas of ministry, so that we're doing it together and not apart from them. Um, so in my role, I get to work with a lot of different people. I get to work with other areas of ministry at the national office. I get to work with my team. I get to work with our sites around the world. I don't get to interact much with like participants and team leaders because I'm more on the back end of things. When my teammates who are working with participants and team leaders have questions about like how should we do something, they typically talk to me and I'll try to figure that out and give them an answer on how to process people.
That's
Yeah.
great. What do you feel is the biggest misconception that people have about your role or your team?
I think the biggest misconception is that I'm just an admin. And I'm finding that people who have the gift of administration typically are resorted to just being an admin. And I find that disappointing because I think people with the gift of administration can do more than just doing admin work. Another misconception that I hear often is people who value structure, processes, rules, or guidelines do not allow the Holy Spirit to work. And we don't care about people and relationships. So I hear that a lot, and I'm always having to explain to them, we care about people. Yes.
Yes, and there's structure that we can bring into this, right?
Mhm.
Like, yeah, how do we figure this out? So tell me, back up a little bit, Pang. Tell me kind of about your journey. Like, how did you end up here? Because knowing you were in the private sector and kind of moved into that, but just give me a little bit of that. How did you end up at this place with Envision and within this role?
So my professional background is in business, which is ironic because I have a degree in fine arts, BA in fine arts. I took a business class in college and I hated it. So I think it's ironic that after I graduated, my experience has been in business. So I started it was a small company. It was an aviation mechanical parts company as an assistant buyer. And then I moved into working as a healthcare buyer for Ford Motor Company. And then I moved into operations with Ford. So as I was doing that, I was also doing a lot of administrative ministry with my church for a time. And then I also did a lot of, traditional type of ministries like leading Sunday school class and leading small groups and all that other stuff. And so I always felt like my time was torn between have a full-time job and doing ministry and being in the corporate world for so long. And I always felt like I never fit in well with the corporate world. I wanted to do ministry full time. And so uh, I was drawn to Envision because their mission is all about identifying and developing young leaders. And that's what I'm passionate about. And it just so happened that they had a position open that were looking for my experience. And so I thought this was a great opportunity for me to start using my gift of administration in a ministry context. And so here I am today, about 5 years later.
That's awesome. And I think that in that space, there's so many times where we feel like the gifts that we have or the talents, the experience, the expertise that we've, been given through this and be able to use it with your heart is also a key piece.
Mhm.
Which speaks back to that misconception you were talking about earlier of like, hey, just because I have these gifts does not necessarily mean that I'm not bringing this in, right? Eh,
Yep.
Ping, as you made that transition kind of from more of the corporate world into nonprofit.
Mhm.
I know that's been a challenge for others. And I was just curious, like, what elements might have been a challenge for you as you were kind of coming into it, put yourself back in that Pang from 5 years ago. Um, or over the course of time,
Mhm.
what are some of the challenges that you kind of expected, or maybe what are some things that were even easier than you anticipated?
I think the first thing I recognized that I felt that was a challenge. So in the corporate world, you have to learn to separate your professional life from your personal life. And being in the corporate world for what, over 10 years and then moving into nonprofit, there is no separation in nonprofit. And so when I started 5 years ago, I had to figure out how to let my coworkers into my personal life. So at the beginning, that was a bit of a challenge for me and for me to be okay with, because I spent so long separating the two. Because in the corporate world, when you get close to someone, I mean, you just end up getting hurt because in the corporate world, everybody's all about getting to the top, right? And they will step on anyone to get to the top. Um, and here, what I'm experiencing is not like that. And so, learning to accept that that's the new culture, and that having a relationship and being personal with your coworker is actually a benefit. And so that was, I think, the first challenge I saw. Um, Something that was easy and flexible that I found, I think, would be the laid backness of the culture of nonprofits and the flexibility that they give to their employees. I felt like I never had that in the corporate setting. And so that I was surprised by that. It also took me a while to get used to that. Um, but I really, really enjoyed that part of a nonprofit.
It's interesting, Peng, because I think in that space, and especially being structurally minded, more, coming in from an
Mhm.
operations perspective, and given your background in kind of the for-profit world, I know that all places, situations are unique. So I'm not trying to say, like this is, but I've heard of some struggles where they come in and like, hey, you get these new folks and they're so excited. You're stepping into this new role and you're like, oh guys, we got all these things we could do. And it's immediately like met with resistance, at least initially, because they're like, wait, who are you? What are you coming in? And you're like, hey, look at all these process, like we can learn from, and whether it's business processes like Six Sigma or like, efficiencies or driving, like different ways of thinking through that. Paying. Was that kind of your experience as well? Did you encounter some of that at least initially?
Um, I did, because I think the experience that I brought was more organizational, um, and is more process driven, than I think what Envision is used to. So trying to bring that in at first was a challenge, helping people understand, project plans, helping people to understand, thinking about a couple of months ahead and not the right now. I think those were challenging, and those concepts that I was bringing up to them, it was hard for them to grasp that or understand that. Another thing, which is still a challenge even today, is documentation. I mean, my experience so far here is it's all about relationships. Like agreements and partnerships are made based on two persons' relationship with one another and based on their verbal commitment to each other. Okay. And I'm all about documentation, right? Okay, great. Let's have it in writing, and let's file it away. Um, so I think that there's still some challenge there. Yeah, I think being organized at first was also a challenge. I think with older generation, they're more old school, right? So they're all about paper. So technology and systems is a bit harder for them to accept. When we moved from Colorado to Columbus, um, our facilities department was trying to move away from paper waste. And so the goal was not to have a waste basket in your cubicle. And I think that was hard at the beginning. Yeah, so it's small things like that.
I think that's awesome. I think it speaks a lot of just the general practice of like
Mhm.
change management, right? Like
Mhm.
of how do we walk through this? How do we initiate change and bring people on board? As you've thought about this in the 5 years, are there any lessons that you've learned or stories of success of like, hey, I was trying this way and I was kind of hitting a brick wall and I kind of switched and here's and it made a difference or like different. I'm trying to think of other folks that are in your role that are like, hey, I'm administratively minded. I can see things that are going on and I'm not getting traction. Like, are there any stories that come to mind that helped you kind of move the organization forward or even move yourself forward in that
Oh,
space?
wow. Okay. Let me see. I think it's funny because I don't know if people who are like me also experience the same thing, but I never see what the impact I make. I only know because they tell me. Okay. And it's always just the small stuff. Um, for example, my site leaders come back and tell me all the time how they appreciate that I take the time to respond to their email. And a lot of times here, it's hard for my team to keep up with their emails or because there's a lot of emails that they're receiving, they have to pick and choose which email to respond to. And a lot of times, our site staff ask a lot of logistical questions, like what do I do because I'm coming home, the things I need to think about, the things I need to do, or who do I need to talk to about this? Where can I get our branding materials? Because I'm trying to create this. And so um, a lot of times they come to me because I always give them an answer. If I don't know the answer, I'm always looking for the answer to give to them. And so I think that's one thing they always appreciate is just responding to their questions in a timely manner. And I want to emphasize timely manner because they're not waiting a week or a month to receive this email, like within a few hours or within a day. Um, they receive the email. And so I think that's one small success because I do prioritize responding to my emails. My motto I live by is to never leave an email unread in my inbox. Always give everyone an answer. And so I strive to do that. Another thing I tried introducing to my team is cleaning up their files, right? So if they are file or document types of people, they need to learn to clean that up. Because when I came into this organization, there were years of documentations that weren't being used. And so I came in and I said to them, if we're not using these, we need to delete them, right? If they're no longer relevant to what we're doing, we need to remove them because we can't keep stacking up our hard drive or our storage drive with files. Um, so that's one small thing. I also try to bring in consistency with my team because everybody has different personalities, right? And so the way we function and the way we operate, I try to tell them, let's try to keep things consistent. Um, so that when people talk to us, we're giving the same message and we're operating very similarly. And it's not different across the board with our team. So I think it's just small things that I think my team has noticed that has caused improvements in the way we operate.
One that I remember, you can fact check me on this because it was you. But of having like 20 different applications, one for each field office or side office. Was that correct that there was like different applications based on where they were going?
Yes, but that was based on the system we had.
Okay.
Yeah, because before we went to a system. We were doing everything manual. It was just one application. And then someone previous to me found a system that they wanted to use to onboard and process our participants. And in that system, we had to create 20 of the same applications because we have 20 sites.
And I think for me, Peng, what stood out is just that the ability to step back for a second and look across and go, okay, where are we being redundant and unnecessarily, right? Like you were saying earlier, like, well, there isn't documentation for these things over here that are important. And yet we have reams of documentation over here that we never use, right? And so that kind of disparity as you're living in that space is sometimes it takes that fresh perspective to come in and be like, all right, let's reevaluate, guys. What are we really trying to accomplish here?
Yeah, and then the other thing I also noticed, I came in because to me, everything has to have a meaning and a purpose. And so when I started with Envision and they were showing me the ropes, a lot of times I was asking them, well, why are we doing that? Or isn't there a better way? Right. And I mean, the team didn't think about that before. They were like, well, we've always been doing it. Okay, well, it doesn't make sense for us to do it that way. Right. So how can we make this better? Because, the comment you made earlier, Micah, is like, we're duplicating work. So how can we do this better? Yeah.
Was that received by your team? Like when they came in, because the other side of this, Peng, that I would say is I saw you dive in a lot and do a lot of things yourself, like that you saw that were redundant or whatever. You're like, this just needs to happen. It doesn't matter who does it. I'm just going to step in. I'm going to do some things. Like, tell me about some of the strategy or the thought behind you and how you handle those situations, trying to get to either a new system or trying to update a process or something in those ways. What's your kind of approach on that?
Well, I'm a doer, so I just naturally do things. Whether the team understands it or not, I'm gonna do it myself because I know it's to make everyone's life better. And so I think the comment I always get, like after I do anything, the team does always come back and say, that was great. We don't know what you did, but that was great. Whatever you did, we appreciate you. Right? It's a good thing and a bad thing, because when you don't involve your teammates in some of those details work that you do, they lose sight of what is needed in order to be set up, and to do things well. And so right now I'm in a place where I'm trying to figure that out. Like, how do I bring my team with me so they understand that on the back end, it needs to be done correctly and thought through well so that the end product can go smoothly. And so, I mean, that's been a challenge because a lot of people on my team are like, thinkers and, visionaries, and they have an idea and they just want to run with it, and I'm the one that's saying, well, hold up. We need to think about these things. Right. And then when they say, well, why? I have to explain to them, well, why these things matter. So, yeah.
Well, I think a lot of times it's that awareness, right? You're building a relationship so that you can have those kind of conversations a lot, Peng, right? And one of the relationships I'd like to dig into a little bit is just with your site leaders. If I'm correct, I think Envision has 22 different global sites.
Yes. Yes.
About that. So give me just at a high level, like what's a quick overview of kind of maybe how your organization and these field sites are structured? Because then I have a couple questions on like, how do you sync with them? What's communication look like? That kind of stuff.
Yeah. Okay. So the way we're structured, we have our director, and then we have what we call our site developers, and we have two. It's our site developers that work directly with our site leaders. So on the site, it's site coordinators and then site associates. and then site local staff. Not all sites will have site associates and site local staff. Okay, because that all depends on their staffing. So that's how it's structured. And then our site developers, one focuses on a strategy, ministry, on the ground. And then the other site developer focuses on personnel and care. Okay. So our site developers meet with each of our sites regularly to talk about those things, right? Strategy about achieving mission, creating ministry on the ground that's needed for their context, because every site is different. And then they also talk about making sure our sites are healthy and they're operating within what their capacity is, right? And not be overstretched. So that's how we're structured. Okay, I think I answered your question.
Yeah, I think
I
you
thought
did.
I had another thought, but
No, you're good. So, okay, so given that kind of background, Peng,
Mhm.
what are some ways that you stay in sync with your field office, the locations, the directors that are over there to make sure that you're getting the needs and partnering well with them?
You mean as you, me, or you as in you general with our team?
Good question. I would say you general as a team, like how
Okay.
are you making sure that you're getting their needs met?
Okay.
For example, I've seen things like, surveys, we do annual visits, we do, like different things. Like, are there different mechanisms that you leverage to make sure that you're partnering well to
Mhm.
meet the needs of those site leaders?
Mhm. So so everyone on my team has a different role, and so depending on what they need from our sites, they will meet with our sites differently. In the area of our programs, what we've done in the past is host uh we call it many different things. One we used to call it think tank, right? And so we want to get our site's thoughts on maybe something particular related to our programs that we're looking for, so that what we build or what we do for the national office level is what they need when the participants hit the ground, so that we get their feedback. We also just done like a mass survey to our sites that has never done well. So so maybe not do that because that has never been successful. I think our people are more face to face and more personal. And so I think doing like the Zoom hosting of these sessions are more helpful for us to gain their feedback on what we can do with the programs that they need. I think that's the major one and the most successful one. Um, so we used to do that in the past. I think now what we're doing is we created a what my director calls it an advisory team. And so we just have a select few from our sites that are part of that team where we can go to them to get their feedback and their thoughts on initiatives that we're trying to do at the national office so that we can consider their perspective on the ground.
Yeah, I think that's great. One question for you within this space of um, do you have any best practices with either communicating with site leaders, with teams, either sending, receiving by the site, kind of overall vision, getting data back, like in those, like what you just said about, hey, it was better to do face to face because they're more relational than it was a survey.
Mhm.
Getting a site, the advisory committee, and then you could also follow it up with a larger, feedback mechanism. Any best practices that you found in the last few years that have worked really well for you guys?
Um, let's see. There was a lot you threw in there. Um,
Sorry, Peng. It's
no,
a
that's okay.
multiple layered question. So
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, I was just trying to like, I don't know what best practices have come like, hey, I've learned these things. Like, hey, when
Yeah.
I communicate elsewhere, just because I guess I'm coming from an assumption of there's challenges when you're dealing with 22 different site leaders,
Yes.
right? And different countries and different cultures and different
Mhm.
backgrounds and different
Mhm.
um ideas of what is needed for their
Mhm.
local engagement. And so
Mhm.
I can see that being a challenge. Not maybe that's just an assumption. First of all, you can validate, like maybe there
Yep.
are, or maybe
Yep.
there aren't.
They
Um,
are.
so what, give me an idea. Like, let's start this way. Give me an idea of some of the challenges you face with dealing with so many different dispersed sites around the world with different backgrounds and cultures and different perspectives.
I think the biggest challenge is communication. I mean, we're still trying to figure that out. Because like you said, Michael, we have like 20 sites around the world. Like how do we create a posture of transparency and engagement with them in terms of what we're doing at the national office and getting information from them in terms of what they need from us so that we can support the mission that they're doing there, and then also them being aware of each other's ministry on the ground so that they can cross collaborate. And so that has always been a challenge for us is communication, so that all of that can be met. In the past, we didn't do communication well because we didn't have the tools. So the only tool we had was via email, and people did not like email, right? And because everyone was around the world, we weren't using the same tool to communicate with one another. Some people use WhatsApp, and there's some other apps out there. I think at one point we tried Facebook Messenger. That didn't work. We also even had like a Facebook page. Maybe it worked early on, but now it doesn't work. Um, so it wasn't until recently that the Alliance started pushing out a lot of the Microsoft products. And so with Microsoft Teams, in the last, couple of years, we've moved and communicated to the team to start moving in that way because now everybody has access to, right, Microsoft Teams, and everybody has an account, and so they can chat and communicate that way. And so we create groups and channels in there. Another one is sending out monthly communications on what's happening here. Um, at the national office, we recently started utilizing Microsoft SharePoint, and creating pages and sites there so that it's more accessible to our sites. Um, and then another thing we added was, I think it's quarterly calls with our sites that are, I think, about an hour and a half long. And it's just an opportunity for us to update them on what we're doing at the national office, and then opportunity for them to ask questions, opportunities for them to share what's going on in their context, and opportunity to pray for, one another, um, that kind of stuff. Um, I think those are the different ways we've been trying to stay connected. And so things have been a lot better than, it was 4 or 5 years ago, when I started.
Well, and I just think as an organization, that takes time, right, Peng? It takes time to put some of those systems in place to make sure everyone has equal access. Um, some organizations we deal with may not have that. You have limited access countries or other things where you can't leverage as much, but getting as many people as possible on the same systems, the same tool sets,
Yes.
and then structuring that with what I also heard was, hey, there's monthly and quarterly direct one-to-one or like team-to-team kind of engagement,
Mhm,
as well as globally. And so
mhm,
by layering it down through those processes, it starts to change. And I
mhm,
would call it turning the Titanic, right? You're
mhm.
putting enough pressure on it to eventually get it to go in a direction, but it
Yes,
takes a lot of pressure over 3 or 4
yes,
years to kind of do that. So don't get discouraged in the short-sighted, kind of think
yes.
more long term. Does that kind of make sense or align with what your
Yes,
experience?
yes. No, that's right. Because when we first started moving everyone to Teams, like a lot of people, not a lot of people were using it. I can't remember the number of people that were using it because I was asked the question and I had to look up the data and I had to tell my team. And I said, that's not even half our staff. And so we said, communicate to everyone to use Teams. This is where they can find, different kinds of information. And I haven't even looked to see if 100% of our staff is using Teams yet. But we're still in that phase of continue to communicate, continue to press that, you need to use Teams and you need to use SharePoint because that's where you find information. So yeah, I agree with that. But I think the biggest practice that works for us, which I'm very surprised because in my opinion is very archaic, is word of mouth, Micah. Believe it or not, word of mouth. We um we get invited to churches and events. Um and so they hear through that. And the Christian Missionary Alliance also has three Christian colleges, right? Crown in Minnesota, Simpson in Redding, California, and Toccoa Falls in Toccoa, Georgia. And so we also go to those three colleges and speak. And so it's through that we get a lot of, our participants that join our program. And then across the nation, the Christian Missionary Alliance have, so many districts across the states that they have, leadership conferences and events, mission mobilizer events that we're also invited to. And so when my team goes and speaks, they talk about Envision and what we do. And, they promote us there. And so that's how people hear about us, and that's how people, you know, go through our programs.
So speaking of programs and kind of participants, how do you currently track engagement within Envision or the programs that you help run?
So I don't think it was tracked well before, just because I think there just wasn't enough staffing with the team to kind of prioritize and focus on that. When I started 5 years ago, I was trying to move our team towards systems and automations and the importance of data and information and how you can synthesize that, and what that means and how it benefits us by collecting those different types of data points. Um, so that's how we were tracking data before in the old system, which was just really number of people and the places that they were going. With the system before, it has some limitations. Uh, with Service Week, because we recently transitioned over, there's a lot more data points that I would like to track. Um, but essentially, it's the program system, whether it's our previous one or Service Week that we track our engagement, and then we also send a survey to every participant, whether teams or interns that completed their trip with us. And that's how we collect their information and their experience. With interns, we have an intern coordinator who actually meets with them as well and do one-on-one. And so that's another way for us to collect some more information. And then we also have a CRM within the alliance that we also track um, some data.
Are there key points that you've seen within that tracking of engagement of like, hey, like overall kind of vision of where you're going, Pang. And we may cut this later because I'm like, I don't even know what I'm asking right now. But of just like in that engagement piece, like let me ask it this way. Your role is usually one where you have to manage through other departments.
Mhm.
And what I've seen successful in a lot of cases are like numbers. Some people want numbers, some people want stories, some people want other things. Like, what are tips that you can share about either leveraging the engagement data that you have, the stories that you're gathering through surveys, the other things? How have you helped manage or learn to manage across the organization to also communicate the value of what's going on?
Wow. Okay. So I think there's two things we look at. One is numbers, right? How many teams, how many participants, how many interns. And then the other is their experience. Was it a good experience? Was it not a good experience? And specifically in the experience of um, transformational with Christ is what we look for. Um, and then what testifies to those two data points for us is when we see them return um, to another site, whether if it's through another internship or whether it's progression through our programs. Because the way we envision our programs to work is team trips is to introduce to you what missions look like and what God is doing around the world, right? It's just introducing you to that. Internship or individual trips under 1 year is to get your feet wet, right? Is this something for me? Is this something I want to do long term for Christ, right? And then getting your hands dirty. And then we have a residency program, which is a 2-year program, which is to equip you to going into long term. And so if we see them move through our programs, we know that it's a success. And that's typically the story we want to tell our leadership. Why Envision exists is we're creating workers, future workers for whether it's for the alliance or for the local churches, right? In the context that our participants are coming from. And so if and when we get there, that's the end goal.
No, that's great. Thank you. All right, let me shift a little bit. So using Service Reef, can you share a story of how that has helped you or your team in the past that since switching systems? Tell me a little bit about that experience and how has that helped you guys out?
So I think, in my opinion, it's still early for us in the implementation process. One, because it's for us, it's not just implementing a new system, it's I feel like it's a culture shift for every one of our participants, and even for my team here. And so when you have that aspect of it, I think it just takes longer to see the fruits of what Service Weave can do for us. I see a lot of potential and opportunities with what Service Weave can do for us, but right now, what we're doing is figuring out and working out all the kinks, right? And improving the process and making like tweaks in the system that will work best for us, right? And then at the same time, we have to educate our participants on thinking differently on how to lead their team when they want to go on a trip with Envision. Because previously, our office did a lot of the work, right? So team leaders and participants didn't have to do a lot. Moving to Service Reef, the thought has been we want to empower them to take a more active role with their team so that they're not asking us for all the information. They have access to the registration link. They don't need to wait for us. they have access to track and view the progress, of their team members and where they're at and completing all these tasks. Um, so that's been a challenge, right? Changing their way of thinking and managing their team and taking a more proactive role, and then teaching my team as well to not always give the answer, because I like to teach people to know how to do it for themselves. And so if we already have the resources, I just point them back to the resources. And so teaching my team to also kind of posture it the same way.
Yeah. Kind of, but it's a shift in teaching them to fish
Yes.
versus, just giving
Yes.
them that, right? So it's,
Yes.
yeah, it's an old act,
Yes.
it's an old statement, but it still rings true even to
Yes.
today. Totally get
Yeah.
it. Um, put yourself into Pang's shoes last April or May. Tell me
Right.
a little bit about the Service Reef onboarding experience.
Okay.
Like, I don't even think we've had a little bit of time to connect, but I'm just like, like go back to April, May, June, you're launching this program. Like, what was it like early on in that onboarding experience and working with our team to kind of like get you guys up and board and kind of structure you into a brand new system?
Mhm. I thought it was a great experience. If you haven't heard already, during this session, our organization is very relational. Okay. And so last year when we moved over to Service Reef, I think that was the highlight of my experience with your team. Micah, is that you guys were very easy to talk to, very easy to work with, very personable, very intentional about not just, trying to sell your product, but also like getting to know the person you're working with and getting to know what their goals are and trying to meet that. I appreciate that. And because of that, you guys always went above and beyond to make sure that we're taken care of. And that really spoke a lot to me and my team, as I worked with them to implement Service Reef. And the fact that the purpose of your platform aligns with our mission. I think that's what's got me sold, was that it's all about mobilizing people, developing leaders. Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you. Okay, so just closing up,
Mhm.
two kind of last questions here for you. Peng, what is one piece of advice that you can share with others that are maybe coming into this missions or mobilization space, others who may be structurally minded or very detail oriented? Any advice that comes to mind for folks that are in a similar peer group?
I know this is simple and this is not profound whatsoever, but I feel like it's always the simple things that people always have the hardest time doing. And really, it's not about you. It's about God and the work he's doing. Because I mean, in this space of mission mobilizing, you're working with leaders, right? You're working with leaders. If not participants, you're working with leaders. And so my advice is, you don't know everything. Even though you're a leader, you don't know everything. And so submit to other leaders who's been placed in that position to lead in the area that they've been hired to do. And it's not about your way and it's not about their way. Um, and trying to learn, because we're always learning. I don't think anybody can ever get to a place where they're like, I'm done learning. I think we're always learning. I mean, I'm learning that. And I'm like, oh man, I just don't want to learn anymore. But that's not true. I'm constantly having to learn and posture myself that way, and just trying to learn and understand another person's perspective. Um, I think that's important. Because what I'm finding is when you're working with other leaders, you're gonna clash. And so you got to figure out how to submit to one another, and how to see things from other people's perspective, because everyone is different. and everyone's gifting that they bring to the table is different.
Oh, that's great. Peng, where can others and listeners engage with you more or hear more about Envision and where you guys are going?
Yeah, visit us at weareenvision.com. It has everything about us. And follow us on our social media platform, Instagram and Facebook.
That's
Yeah.
great. Anything else we should have talked about today, Peng?
Um, we could have talked about a lot of things.
We really did. So,
Yeah.
well, well, thank you so much for your time, Peng. Really appreciate it and the time today and just hearing that journey of going from Ford and some of those, more profit-based sectors into nonprofit and then how long sometimes it takes to change some of that culture within. But I guess one thing I'm walking away is just the encouragement of like, if you're doing the right thing and you're doing it under submission to
Mhm.
God and to the leaders that have been appointed, the right result will eventually come. So just keep investing
Yep.
because sometimes it does take a little bit longer. We
Yep.
want things to be instant, right? Especially in
Yep.
today's culture and day and age. I'm
Yep.
like, if I don't have an answer in 2 minutes, like,
Yep.
well, organizational culture doesn't happen that way, right?
Yep.
Change doesn't happen that
Yeah.
way. And so just
Yep.
that encouragement to kind of walk through that. So
Yeah.
thank you, Peng.
Yep.
Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for having me, Micah. This has been fun.
Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for listening today. Again, that was Pang Thao with Envision and just a great conversation about how do you bring in your skills, your talents, your abilities into a space, and then watch how that change can take place over time. Really appreciate this conversation and the ability to learn different perspectives from different in your organization. So hopefully you take away a little bit of a perspective today and give some extra credence and patience to those who are trying to enact change. Ask the why, like Simon Sinek started, his book of like start with why. And I think in a lot of those cases, that was something else that stood out in my conversation with Peng today of start with a why. Understand why we're doing certain things because that's where we can find efficiencies and different things to bring to the table. So thanks for listening. Subscribe below and let us know your thoughts. Thanks.